Hello and welcome to the Ourdadsstamps YouTube channel, where we talk about all things related to stamps and stamp collecting. My name's Pete West and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates of new content. Hello again from Ourdadsstamps. A couple of weeks ago we went to Madrid for a couple of days, and whilst we were there had a look round the sites and a few of the art galleries, and that gave me an idea for this week's video. Late 1950s, 1960s, Spain produced a series of stamps depicting various odd Spanish painters and artists. And I thought I'd have a look into those sets and just talk about them. The first series was produced in 1958, and there were 10 stamps produced, all representing paintings done by Goya. Now Goya, Francisco José de Goya y Lucientes, to give it his full name, and please excuse my Spanish pronunciation, he was considered to be one of the most important Spanish artists of the late 18th, early 19th century. And this set shows some of his paintings. Now, because of the printing processes at the time, they were actually done in a single colour with a frame in gold, which I think is quite effective actually. And in each of these sets, year by year, there is always one that's a portrait of the actual artist himself. And in this particular set, the portrait of Goya is actually painted by Vicente Lopez, but most of them are self-portraits. The surprising thing about this set is actually it doesn't include what is considered his most famous painting, La Maya Desnuda. This was described as the first totally profane life-size female nude in Western art. That particular painting was depicted on a set in 1930 to commemorate the death centenary of Goya. So maybe they decided that they didn't want to duplicate a stamp that had already been produced. Anyway, there were 10 stamps produced. As I said, 9 of them were of his paintings and 1 is a portrait of Goya himself. And they're all of his early work. It's an interesting story with Goya. In his mid-40s, an undiagnosed illness left him completely deaf. And this changed his character somewhat, and he became withdrawn and introspective. And it actually affected the output of his work. Before then, it was fairly classical designs and portraits of people. Reflects contemporary life in 19th, 20th century. But after his illness, his paintings or his drawings became more dark and dramatic. And he's actually quoted as saying that the sleep of reason produces monsters, which clearly reflects the sort of paintings he was doing. When we were in Zaragoza, we looked around an exhibition of Goya. And as I said, a lot of his early paintings were really nice and quite appealing, something if I had millions of pounds, would have up in my house. But the later work is more disturbing and not that appealing, to be honest. However, they do demonstrate that he had quite a sharp satirical wit at the time, and some of them were quite amusing, even though they were perhaps a bit disturbing. So, yeah, an interesting character. As I said, these stamps were produced every year, and every year was a different artist. And in 1959, the next year, the artist chosen was Diego Velázquez. He is another well-regarded Spanish painter, and his work became a model for 19th century realist and impressionist painters. So he was very well considered in the art world. His most famous painting was Las Meninas, which is Spanish for the ladies in waiting, and is a portrait of the 5-year-old Infanta Margaret Teresa with her entourage of maids of honour. But it's become one of the most widely analysed works in Western painting because it's very complex. He's actually painted himself in the picture. He's also painted a mirror image of the king and queen, and the whole thing is very expertly done. So it's a well-renowned and well-liked painting. And we're actually going to come back to that painting in a little while. But once again, there were 10 stamps in this set, and Velázquez' self-portrait is on the 80-cent stamp. And again, all the stamps are done in a single colour with a gold frame. And this was a theme throughout the whole of the series of these stamps. In 1960, it was the turn of Bartolomé Murillo, again another well-known Spanish painter from the 1600s. He is best known for his religious works, but he also produced a considerable number of paintings of contemporary women and children, and both of these things are reflected in the set of stamps. And once again, there is a self-portrait in the middle of this set, on this case the one peseta. These sets continued with a different artist each year, and the next one in 1961 was another well-known Spanish artist. I say Spanish artist, he was actually Greek, but he was adopted by the Spaniards and became known as El Greco, standing for the Greek. His real name was actually Dominikos Theotokopoulos, but as I said, the Spanish called him El Greco, which was obviously a lot easier. Again, this set of stamps is done in a single colour with a gold frame, and the one peseta features a self-portrait of him. This style of stamp series continued for the next 5 or 6 years with a different artist each year. So in 1962 they had Francisco de Zuberan, and in 1963 Giuseppe de Ribera. In 1964 it was the turn of Joaquin Sorolla. Now, Sorolla was born in Valencia, so I've seen quite a few of his works. He actually started his art education at the age of 9 in Valencia, and by 18 he'd moved to Madrid to study in the Prado Museum. One of his famous works, The Sad Inheritance, highlights his ability, and on a huge canvas. The subject was of disabled children bathing in the sea at Valencia under the supervision of a monk, and this received great official recognition and propelled his career. There is now a museum of his works in Madrid, which is housed in his house that he lived in. In 1965 it was the turn of Torres, and in 1966 Sert to have their paintings depicted on the sets. Before 1967 they changed slightly and decided to produce a series of cave paintings. And the cave paintings are actually in a similar style with the gold frame, but are of 2 colours rather than just one to highlight the drawings. So a slight change before going back to the original format in 1968, where they showed the works of Fortuny, and in 1969 the works of Alonso Cano. In 1970, however, they changed the style of the stamps completely, and with new printing method they were able to print the paintings in full colour as they would look in real life. Now, to me, these don't look anywhere near as nice as the original sets. I much prefer the sets done in a single colour. It gives it a more uniform feel for me somehow or another. I mean, the stamps from 1970 onwards could just be miniature paintings, if you like, so I think it tends to lose a bit. But the series continued for another 9 years in the same format with a different painter each year, and one of the stamps would be a self-portrait or a portrait of the painter. And in 1978 they chose Picasso as the painter to be featured, and the self-portrait for this set is actually on the 5 peseta stamp, and there is only 8 values in this one as opposed to 10 in most of the others. Now, I'm not a great fan of Picasso, I have to say. I know there's lots of people who rave about him, and fair enough, he must have some appeal, but it's not in my taste. But there's a couple of interesting things in this set. First, his most famous piece of artwork, the Guernica, or Guernica, as my Spanish friends keep correcting me, doesn't feature in this set. That actually features on a mini sheet in 1981 that celebrated 100 years since his birth. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen the Guernica. It's a depiction of the cruelty of war, specifically the German aerial bombing of the Basque town during the Spanish Civil War. But it was one of the paintings we got to see when we were in Madrid. And I was shocked to see that throughout the painting there is places where the paint has run. There's places where the colour has bled into other colours and smudges. Now, whether this was done deliberately for dramatic effect or not, I'm not sure. But it's disturbing and certainly does the job, but not, in my view, a particularly nice painting. But one stamp that does feature in the Picasso set is Las Meninas, the same painting that was featured on the set from Velázquez, but this time painted by Picasso. Now, you can compare the two stamps if you like, the Picasso version of Las Meninas and the Velázquez version, and see which you think is the best. I know what my answer is to that, but I would show them both together and you can make up your own minds. Finally, the last in this series was produced in 1979, featuring the artwork of Vicente Masip. Surprisingly, there is no set featuring the artwork of Salvador Dali. Now, I find that an amazing omission, and I don't understand why there is none of his artworks in this set. He was a very vociferous supporter of the Franco regime, and whether this upset people, but obviously this series of stamps started when Franco was in power, so I really don't understand that omission, and I don't understand why there's nothing of Dali there. There are plenty of stamps with a Dali theme, with Dali paintings on them, but not in this particular series, so I do find that hard to understand. However, I hope you've enjoyed that little trip into some Spanish artwork. I'm not an art expert by any means, but I do enjoy looking at some paintings, and I have enjoyed looking at these sets. And it's certainly worth considering if you are looking at a thematic collection, then stamps with art on them is certainly one worth looking at. And if you do decide that, these Spanish sets are well worth a look. They're not very expensive. Very few of them are more than a couple of pounds at most to buy, so fairly easy to get hold of. And it just so happens that I have many of these sets for sale in my eBay shop. So come and have a look and make me an offer. So take a look and see you again in another couple of weeks. Thank you for listening. Bye. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.